Welcome back. Today we are heading back into the Commonwealth for a bit of course correction. In my first look at Fallout 4 on the Switch 2, I made the executive decision to omit the 40 frames per second mode. My logic at the time was that 120Hz displays aren't exactly mainstream in every living room yet, so I wanted to keep things simple. But it was brought to my attention that while the average person might be on a standard 60Hz TV, the reality is that if you're the type of person who cares about frame times, latency, performance, etc., there's a very high chance you're playing on a modern gaming monitor or a high-end TV, and one modern enough to support those higher refresh rates. So yeah, I'll take that one on the chin. For the sake of clarity, in this video I'll be referring to the three main targets as performance, the 60 frames, balanced, the 40 frames, and quality, the 30 frames per second. So today, we're setting the record straight. I'll be putting all three modes head to head to see if this golden ratio actually lives up to the hype or if it's just a niche luxury. Now quickly before we get into this, I saw a few comments asking where the 40 FPS option was, as they were only able to see 30 and 60. If that's you, don't worry, your game isn't broken. The Switch 2 is actually doing some of the heavy lifting behind the scenes here. When you're docked, the console performs checks with your display to see what it's capable of, because that 40 frames per second requires a 120Hz refresh rate to look smooth. The Switch 2 will actually hide the option entirely if it detects that you're on a standard 60Hz TV or monitor. It's just basically the console looking out for you. It hides the setting to prevent any nasty stuttering or judder that happens when the frame rate doesn't line up with your screen's refresh rate. It's usually the case for older displays, but if you're playing handheld, that won't be an issue, because the screen is naturally 120Hz, so you'll always have that option. Even if you disable the 120 output manually, that 40 frames per second option still appears. This is because the Switch 2's internal screen has native VRR built in. The hardware is smart enough to realise that even if you've capped the TV output to 60Hz, the handheld screen can still handle that, and it will basically just bypass the toggle. Now, I will admit, since publishing my last video, I have stopped playing docked and spent most of my time in handheld, and I've definitely come to appreciate the balance mode a lot more. I can definitely see it being the definitive choice for handheld play for many, largely thanks to the variable refresh rate and the smaller screen. That really works wonders for a lot of the textures. The VRR helps in a couple of major ways. First of all, it essentially smooths out those minor frame rate dips you'll inevitably see in chaotic combat or a dense urban area like Diamond City. This is because the screen's refresh rate is matching the game's output in real time. Those tiny drops, for all intents and purposes, are invisible to the human eye. It also does wonders for input delay, because the screen is waiting for the frame to be ready rather than forcing the frame to wait for the next fixed refresh cycle. And that really does make the game feel incredibly snappy. On paper, 40 frames per second might look closer to 30, but in your hands it feels much closer to 60. That's because the frame time, the actual speed of the update, drops when going from 30 to 40 FPS, but it's the exact same drop when you go from 40 to 60 FPS. To put that into layman's terms, you're getting double the frame rate increment for the exact same reduction in lag. You're basically getting 10 free frames per second at no extra cost to how responsive the game feels, so it makes that balance mode just look like the most efficient way to play. But even with that sweet spot at 40 FPS, the performance mode is still tempting for the sheer fluidity of the gunplay, but the cost is high. In performance mode, the resolution scaling is aggressive. I'll go back to that opening sequence where you see your partner's face on a sofa for the first time. Even stood about 2 feet away, the textures were surprisingly soft, and if you move any further back, they're practically unrecognisable. And while switching to the quality setting restores the detail, stable shadows, and those beautiful volumetric god rays, you really do feel that increased frame time. It might not be necessarily fair to call it input lag, but all of the actions definitely feel a bit heavier. And this is why the balance mode is being glammed up as the saviour of this port. It keeps the Wasteland looking like a modern game without the heavy input feel. You will see that the differences are very minimal between each version. To me personally, the biggest difference is still that lighting. Even with the reduced frame time in the VRR, it just doesn't nail the lighting, fog, or the general environmental details as well for me. And that is the main reason I would ever play at a lower frame rate, to soak in the atmosphere and be in awe of the world. But interestingly, when reading through the comments, I did see that quite a few people preferred the more nuanced, muted light and the lessened particle effects of the balance mode. While I can see that, I just love that oversaturated and abundant God ray effect. I think it looks beautiful. But if you look at these comparisons here, you can see what I mean. There are times when the differences really do look so muted and small. Sorry if these images aren't always aligned, I'm still pretty janky with all of this, but you'll see what I mean. There are occasions and situations where I prefer the look of the balanced over quality, and then in the next town or dungeon, I prefer the look of quality, and vice versa. And then you have times that the performance doesn't look too much worse besides the fog in the distance. The main giveaway the particle effects with the dust and blood, but even when the ghouls are flying at you, it doesn't seem massively worse visually. But when your focus moves away from that, you can see the lower res textures in the trains and the gravel. But yeah, the more I look at it, the more it does make my decision to stick with performance look like the solid choice. Either that or I'm just going blind. And I'm not completely oblivious to it. I can see the texture differences on the floor around the train tracks here. It just, for me personally, isn't that much of an issue. And then when you're playing in handheld and it's all downscaled a lot more, I have even less grievances. I'll definitely keep an eye on all of it and keep track of what I do. And I'll make a review at some point down the line going over everything. I'm sure at some stages in the game, the performance mode will be a lot less desirable than the other two, and other areas where that quality visual fidelity will definitely shine through and enhance your experience. Ultimately, the mode you choose to play is a completely subjective opinion. My personal preference for the most part has been the performance mode. That 60 FPS just feels fantastic, and that's in both docked and handheld. I do like to switch to the quality mode occasionally when I know that I'll be wandering around the Wasteland for a while, but as soon as I'm in an enclosed space or heavy combat, the performance mode just wins out. Now, if it were possible to change the setting on the fly, that may have swayed the gauge a little, but having to jump back to the title screen to switch essentially makes you predominantly stick to one mode. For a lot of people, that may well be that balanced middle ground, and I completely appreciate that. But as I said, for me, it's going to be the performance mode. If you do have an external display that supports it, or you play handheld, that balance mode is a great way to play. It's a good compromise of performance and quality, but slightly lacking in the visual fidelity side of things. And chances are, if you have a relatively modern monitor or TV with a higher refresh rate, it will also have some form of variable refresh rate, adaptive sync or G-Sync, and it will look and play like the middle ground of performance and quality that everyone's preaching it to be. Hopefully, this clears a few things up, but I will say that ultimately, there really isn't a lot between them. If you stop and take a bit of time to soak up what's on display, you will start to notice the textures here and there, or a few stutters. But it is such a fast-paced game at times, it's hard to not opt for the performance mode. But maybe that's just my playstyle. I'm not one to sit back and snipe. I try my best to speedrun my death in every fight. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this, and which one you prefer, and if you've played it, what have you spent the most time in? People thought that in the last video, I was overreacting a bit about the lack of gyro and mouse control, and maybe that's true. But it's just such a small thing that makes a huge difference for a lot of players. And at the end of the day, what's the internet good for, if not for a good old moan? I know this video's been a bit of a weird one, just rambling away, but I just wanted to clear a few things up and talk about this balance mode. I know a lot of people were asking for it and wanted to talk about it, and I'm sure most people will play with it if possible, and more power to you. I think I'm just a bit weird, where I'd either like it to look amazing or play amazing, and somewhere in the middle doesn't suit me. But I do think not being able to switch on the fly is a bit of an issue. Hopefully this does get patched soon, but it seems very unlikely. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing. It really does help the channel out. And if not, that's great too. I'm just thankful that people spend part of their day watching, hate watching, or whatever you do. Cheers. With that said, thanks for spending some time with me today. Stay cozy, and yeah, I'll see you around.
Because if my time in the army taught me one thing, it's that war never changes.